Is Robin Kent. She is the Terrestrial Resource Manager at HDR Engineering in Sacramento, and the title of her talk is A Place for Plants in FERC Licensed Hydropower Projects. Welcome, Robin. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Well, I'm finally up here to present a topic that I've been wanting to tell you guys all about pretty much since I got a few years into my job at HDR, which is about the role of botanical species in FERC licensed hydro projects. Specifically, I'm going to talk about some of the positive impacts that the process of FERC relicensing and FERC license implementation can have on botanical resources, using some examples from projects that I've worked on during my nearly 10 years now with HDR working on these projects. And all the pictures that you'll see in this are from the projects I've worked on during my tenure. So, the first thing I usually get asked when I try to describe my job is, what the heck is FERC? Well, FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and they regulate interstate transmission of electricity, natural gas, and oil. And amongst their responsibility is the licensing and inspection of private, municipal, and state hydroelectric projects. As you can see on this map, there are quite a few dams under FERC jurisdiction throughout the United States. In California alone, there are over 210 FERC licensed projects. Those also include some transmission lines that transmit power from hydropower projects. So they're not just the dams and the reservoirs, they're everything involved with the transmission of power from them. The majority of the projects in California were built in the 1950s and 60s during some of the major development of those systems in the United States, but there are some that have elements that date back all the way to the gold rush when they did some of the initial mining and damming of our streams up in the Sierra Nevada. FERC, however, only has jurisdictions over dams that have associated hydropower projects, so things like strictly for irrigation or flood control are not part of their jurisdiction. So in order to legally own and operate a hydropower project in the United States, you have to have a license with FERC. And these licenses are issued for a term of up to 50 years. And every FERC license contains conditions that must be followed during the term of the license. And those almost all include some provisions for the protection, mitigation, and enhancement of environmental resources. When a license expires, you have to go through a relicensing process that takes up to 5 years to do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about details of that licensing process next. Basically, there are multiple ways of going through it, but they all have the same general steps. This is kind of based a little bit on the talk that we had last night. One of the nice things about relicensing is that when you do them, you don't just cover a couple of topics. Almost all resources are dealt with under relicensing. Cultural and historical properties, channel morphology, economics, fuels, hydrology, land use, recreation, water quality, wildlife, all of those things have to be considered during the relicensing of these hydroelectric projects. So, the first part of relicensing is to gather all existing relevant and reasonably available information, including everything you know about the plants of a region, and putting them together in a big document that's called a pre-application document, or a PAD. Excuse me, I will use a lot of acronyms, but I'll try to always tell you what they are before I just go into them. And to identify any gaps in your data. You need to know as much as you can about an area before you can put together a license, because the data that you have for an area will determine what license conditions go into them. So the second part of relicensing is to determine how you're going to acquire the data that you need to put together a complete license application. That's usually by implementing studies. So my first example project that I want to talk about is the Merced River project. On this project, during the writing of the pre-application document, we identified that there were 47 potential special status plant species, and special status to us means everything that's on any kind of a list. ESA, CESA, the California Rare Plant Ranks, BLM list, Forest Service, all of those things are considered special status. But only one species had actually ever been identified and mapped on the project previously, which was beaked clarkia. On BLM lands, they've mapped about 20,000 individuals over 100 acres. However, during the course of the relicensing and the studies, we actually found 151 occurrences containing hundreds of thousands of individuals spread over about 1,300 acres. This is only within the FERC project boundary, which was about a quarter mile around the main reservoir. So that was a gigantic increase in what was actually there versus what was actually known, which is why you need to do the studies. So botanical studies usually include, along with conducting rare and endangered plant surveys, conducting surveys for what we refer to as non-native invasive plants, doing wetland and riparian assessments, oftentimes doing wildlife habitat assessments based on vegetation data, and doing vegetation mapping if that has not already been done in the project area. The data from these studies goes into the license application to help develop the protection, mitigation, and enhancement measures, or PM&Es, which will then must be followed for license compliance during the term of the license. So one of the largest relicensings, in fact probably the largest ever done in the United States, was the joint Drum-Spaulding, Hydroelectric, and Yuba-Bear projects up in the Sierra Nevada. For botanical work, we included surveys for special status plants and invasives, Valley elderberry longhorn beetle, which I include because the methodology for that is looking for the elderberry. And we did wetland and riparian habitat assessments, not only within the project, but also on stream-affected reaches downstream. These studies covered over 10.3 square miles and covered an elevation range below Auburn at about 2,000 feet to above Truckee at 8,000 feet, all along the 80 corridor, and included almost 30 different reservoirs and all kinds of transmission lines, canals, flumes, and other associated projects. So for the special status plant study alone, we documented over 1,500 plant species, including nearly 100 species of carex. These also included 118 occurrences of 13 special status species, of which I believe 3 had previously been documented. At the request of the Tahoe National Forest, whom a lot of this project is actually built, we also documented occurrences of quaking aspen, which is a species of concern to them, and found an additional 61 previously, at least on the map, undocumented occurrences of that. Our findings also included 3 of the now 7 reported occurrences of coral root orchid in California, but at the time of the surveys, they were 3 of only 4 documented occurrences in California. So once you have all of your data, you use that to develop the PM&E measures that will ultimately go into your license. For botanical work or botanical resources, these usually include periodic botanical surveys of the project throughout the term of the license, invasive species management, the monitoring of known rare plant and invasive species occurrences, methodologies to prevent the further spread of invasives that everyone who works on the project must follow when they're doing project-related work, prevention and mitigation of project effects on rare plants, environmental training annually for all staff so they are aware of the environmental resources present on their project and what they need to do in order to comply with the license and make sure they don't negatively impact the environment, restoration and revegetation of disturbed areas, and fuels management to prevent catastrophic fires, which is another thing that ties into the talk that we had last night. So one of the projects where we're currently doing PM&E work is the Sly-Creek and Woodleaf-Kanaka transmission lines on the Plumas National Forest, and in fact I work with Lawrence on this one quite a bit. So this license was issued in 2011, and as part of the license, an invasive species management plan had to be developed, which we did in consultation with the Plumas National Forest. We actively managed skeleton weed, French broom, and Scotch broom on the project, and used multiple techniques in an attempt to eradicate these occurrences from the project. One of the nice things about license compliance is it isn't static. It's adaptive. We've used adaptive management techniques, and we check in annually, if not more often, to see what's working, what's not working, and to update our techniques to make sure that we are actually succeeding in eradicating these plants from the project. Another couple of points I wanted to make about relicensing. Federal agencies and state agencies are involved in the process, but non-government organizations can and are also involved in these projects. They get to have input on what kind of studies they feel are needed, what PM&E measures should be developed, and how the license is actually developed and implemented ultimately. This is especially true on any projects that have federal lands, especially Forest Service and BLM lands. On those lands, the federal agencies have what's called 4E licensing condition authority, which means they get to actually write and put into the license conditions that the licensee must follow through the term of the license. So that's a pretty strong amount of power they have here. The other thing I really want to stress here that most people don't know is that all the stuff that is written for relicensing is publicly available information. Almost all of it is available on either the FERC e-library or on public hydrorelicensing websites, which you can usually just find by searching California relicensings on Google. And it will pull up all of these relicensings that have been done in California, including all of their study plans, the data collected from the studies, the management measures, and other interesting information about it. All right, so once you've done relicensing, it can still take you up to 10 years to get a new license. That's usually because there are always issues over water and endangered fish associated with these projects. So it takes a while to work through all of that to finally get your license. But once you've gotten it, you have to abide by the conditions, and you usually have to continue to coordinate and collaborate with agencies on implementing measures. So one of the longest running license implementations that we've done is on the Donnells-Curtis transmission line, which was relicensed and got its license in 2006 and has conditions for the protection of special status plants and habitat, management plans to protect special status plants and to deal with noxious weeds were written in 2007 and implemented in 2008. And what's special about the Donnells-Curtis transmission line is that it has acres of lava cap habitat at high elevation, which is home to the Stebbins lomatium, which is a special status plant of intense interest to the Stanislaus National Forest on which these lands rest. So we're currently in the 9th year of monitoring the Stebbins lomatium. We have installed over the course of the years 37 permanent monitoring plots within 16 different occurrences, working closely with the Stanislaus botanist, who recently commented that our work on this was the most complete and longest term monitoring for this species on the Stanislaus, and the basis for a lot of their knowledge about the species, period. So, FERC projects, although hydroelectric projects and dams have somewhat of a bad rep, now that they're there, they can still, through this process, have positive impacts on environmental resources, including botanical resources. Through relicensing, you might get the first time that anyone has ever gathered data together on a specific area. You will do plant surveys and monitorings in places that have seldom or never been looked at before. And you get collaboration between the licensees and agencies on the protection of environmental resources. And then during license implementation, you actually put these protections into play. You continue monitoring both special status plants and invasives, actively managing invasive species and other vegetation, and doing environmental trainings for staff. I wanted to end with one last project because it's one of my favorites, which is the Pedro Project. And the reason it's one of my favorites is because part of the study area included the BLM's Red Hills area of critical environmental concern. We did 6 square miles of surveys, identified over 700 species, including 112 occurrences of 12 special status plants, including 2 endangered species listed plants, the Lane's ragwort and the California verbena. There were 25 occurrences of Lane's ragwort, covering almost 3 acres, all but one of which were previously undocumented, and 2 new occurrences of California verbena. All of this was on BLM land, on the Red Hills, so when they put together this license and implement it, it is almost for certain that the BLM will have 40 license conditions to make sure that these occurrences are protected, monitored, and continue to be there and hopefully improve over the course of the next 50 plus years. And relicensings go on. Right now, these are just 5 that I'm working on in California at this time, and there are about 5 others I'm aware of that other groups are doing. So I'd like to briefly thank all the different licensees that I work with and who gave me permission to talk about their projects, and open it up to questions.